Oh, Desda, I'm so happy you could join us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. I am so thrilled to be here with you and this wonderful opportunity to speak to you. I always love when we talk. There's always so much fire and energy.
We do. We have some great conversations. And because I know you, I would like to talk about some things that I might know about you, but that other people might not. I want to talk about your fascinating work with what you call sacred anatomy, energy medicine. In fact, you've got this amazing book, which we'll talk about a little later. And in the book and in your life, you mapped out and diagrammed the human energy system. But I really want to start at the very beginning when you were a kid. Have you always been able to see energy?
You know, that is a terrific place to start because I had very normal, sort of slightly clairvoyant gifts. So I would see energy around people and places and things. So I would see trees with a little light, kind of pretty orange energy around them. And I would see the cat walking through the yard with a little trail of light behind them. And I would see my brothers when they would get into it and be fighting and wrestling. I would see all these red splashes flying here and there. And so I had a kind of a light gift that allowed me as a little child to have a sort of fanciful imagination, and I saw fairies, and I experienced a lot of spiritual kinds of events. One of the things that I remember very vividly as a little girl is just laying on the ground in the grove. We had a big 6-acre parcel, and it was planted with avocado trees in Southern California in the high desert area. And so I would sleep underneath the trees, and I would feel myself just melting into the earth, which is something a lot of little kids experience, you know, this kind of becoming invisible. And I remember feeling like the animals couldn't see me, and I would be just invisible and part of the dirt, and my fingernails were quartz crystals, and my hair was, you know, all the wheat in the fields, and I just became one with this great energy of the planet. And I remember looking up through the leaves of the tree and having this like incredibly peaceful experience of oneness and wholeness, you know, and then hearing my mom go, Desda! You know, like, bringing me like back, you know, oh, I'm in a body and I have to, and I remember it taking me a little while to kind of pull myself together to get up and trudge in for my peanut butter sandwich, you know. But I was little when I did that, 7, 8 years old. And I think a lot of little kids have these deep spiritual moments where they connect with their pets, and they are sure that the cat is talking to them. You know, they can feel it. So I have this thing that I say to students, which is use your imagination. It's the best friend you've got. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, who told you it wasn't real?
Right. Right.
You know,
absolutely.
And so I encourage that with people because I used my own imagination to go for it, to really go for it.
Now, did your parents encourage or poo-poo this kind of thing? What kind of upbringing did you have?
Well, I had a really wonderful childhood in many ways. My mom and my dad both are sensitive. So my mom has sort of premonitions, and my dad is quite clairvoyant and sees all kinds of energies and beings and ghosts and that kind of thing. And we've had the experience of seeing things together at the same time. But I have to tell you that I didn't think it was unusual. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that other people didn't see these things. I just assumed everybody saw them. Mm-hmm. And in my childhood drawings, you can see the energy around people. And I was approached as, well, yeah, it's an artistic rendering, you know. Right. But I was drawing what I actually saw, you know. So my gift really exploded when I was about 14. When I was 12, a death experience. I was in Mexico traveling. My family was all together. We were driving through Mexico in our Volkswagen bus in 1962. So Mexico was a very different country than it is today. And I was getting sick, and they just thought, my mom thought, well, she's got Teresa, you know. But I actually had hepatitis, and then I had acute appendicitis, and that developed into gangrene, and that developed into peritonitis. And then by then I had been taken to the hospital in Guadalajara, Mexico, and I had anaphylactic shock from the penicillin they were giving me. So they were giving me tons of penicillin to get me well enough so they could operate. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime of kind of getting to that point, my appendix just exploded. And so I had an exploded appendix, gangrene, peritonitis, hepatitis that was severe, and anaphylaxia all at the same time. And that took me out. So I had this experience of raising up above my body and looking down at this surgical suite and watching one of the nurses, who were all nuns, knock over a big tray of instruments, and the doctor scream at her. And I just kind of went, well, okay, and went right through the wall, not thinking a thing of it. And then I floated through this corridor, and I looked down into I guess it was a large courtyard with a fountain, a very complex fountain. And I saw two little boys playing with their little cars on the fountain, around the fountain. And these two adult people, a man and a woman, sitting holding hands on a bench. And I looked at them and I went, well, those are nice people. And I kept going. And that was my family. And I, at that very young 12-year-old age, realized that anyone could be my family.
Huh, okay.
And that I belonged as much there as I belonged other places. And so I went down this long tunnel. Now, remember, this is before people were talking about this stuff or writing about it.
Right.
So I had this experience, and I had nowhere to put it. But I went down this long tunnel, and I came to the end of the tunnel, and there was a door that was made of wood. And all along the tunnel were pictures, but I didn't really pay much attention to them because I was fixated on this tunnel and the wood door at the end. And as I approached the wood door, I saw that the wooden door was made of living cherubs. And that they were like winking at me and going, hi. They were really cute. And I was like, oh, hi. And I went to reach out to touch one of the cherubs on the hand, and I pushed the door, and it went flying open, and there standing in front of me was what I called the big white guy. And so the big white guy is actually an angelic being who was like 15 feet tall, the biggest being I'd ever seen, so tall I couldn't quite see his face up there. And so I'm looking up, and he was kind of looking down and looking beyond me and kind of taking in everything. And he didn't have wings, but he was this large white light presence, with arms and legs and sort of with clothing and sort of with a face, but he was dazzling, really dazzlingly beautiful. And I remember looking at him and thinking, he's really pretty, But I saw around behind him, this world that I wanted to go to, this place that I wanted to go to. And on either side of him were these sleeping dog-like creatures. And so I tried to get around him. I tried to get through. And as I was trying to get around him, I saw all these people in the world there, which was all like green rolling hills, and there was a big white building in the distance that had big marble columns and was just like shining out light, and there was a carousel, and there was a merry-go-round, and there were all these things that I wanted to be with, and there were kids everywhere, and there were people in all kinds of clothes. And they would say, come here. And I wanted to be with them more than I wanted to be with anybody in my whole life. I wanted to go there so badly that I thought my heart would break open. And I was trying so hard to get around him. And he just kind of looked at me and he held his hand up and he went like that. And I went flying backward, you know, and that was the last thing that I remembered until I woke up in recovery, kicking my legs and, you know, wildly flailing my arms because I'd been in such deep anesthesia. So that was a death experience that nobody really registered. And I shared it with my mom at the time. I told her she said, Ma, you had quite a dream, you know, and that was kind of how it was left.
Sure, that would make sense to somebody who hadn't ever heard of anything like this.
Right. So it wasn't until years later that I realized that had been a death experience and that I had actually gotten close to the other side. So, so that sort of changed me. And then just a few weeks after that, my family had arrived in Mexico City and we were at the pyramid at Teotihuacan, the big pyramids. And I remember hiking to the top of the big Pyramid of the Sun at Teo. And I went all the way to the top and I stood on the top and I was standing there looking out at this vista, you know, and there were no people there. We were the only people at Teotihuacan, 62, nobody. And in fact, a lot of what's been uncovered since wasn't uncovered. It was just there, right? And so the big stuff was uncovered, really big things, but the smaller, kind of more interesting and intricate things, and certainly some of the caves they've discovered underneath and tunnels and those things were not uncovered. So I looked out from on top of the pyramid and I looked around and I suddenly saw this whole scene and all these people bustling and walking and people wearing extraordinary costumes and this one man with this long green cape, you know, which was, you know, Montezuma's famous Quetzal bird cape. So the Quetzal is a bird that has one long green feather. And so they pulled that feather out of thousands of birds and made this full-length cloak that is in the museum in Mexico City, which I hadn't seen. So I see this guy in this green cape and it's a procession and he's being followed and he's starting up the pyramid and I'm in the middle of a fire and I see like flames and smoke, huge amounts of smoke. And I'm looking through the smoke at this thing. And I have no idea what's going on or anything. And my mom comes and I'm breathing really hard. I'm like, and my mom comes over and she goes, "You okay? You know, you just got out of the hospital and there was a long climb up here." And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And then it disappeared. But it was a kind of an opening. It was a sort of an initiation. And I think that's the thing that happens for people who are available to this sort of other sight. And that happens. We have initiations that happen throughout a lifetime. And my initiations were, you know, kind of dramatic. I was at the top of a pyramid, for crying out loud. And I was in a foreign country and I had a death experience. I mean, these are big initiations. But people have little initiations all the time. And sometimes women experience childbirth as a deep initiation. People experience winning a race or having a physical accomplishment as an initiation into an opening up of something that they had always within them, but they weren't able to quite express.
Right.
And I think that the kind of other light sight that I have is it's available for everyone. I'm a big believer in the demystification of the psychic. I don't think this is a special skill. I think that this is part of the human brain that we haven't yet learned how to tap. And that there are more and more and more people that I'm meeting who have some ability. And it can be frightening for people at first. I mean, it was mind-boggling to look out and see this view that I saw at Teotihuacan. It wasn't until years later, Lisa, that I learned that when they were clearing the top of the pyramid for the 12 event that they did there, big event for the Mayan calendar, all the Toltec shaman were there, you know, it was a big wingding. And so they were making a platform for them to be on. So they cleared some rocks from the top of the pyramid and discovered that at the top of the pyramid was a huge hot tub sized copal burner. So it was an incense burner that was huge, 6-7 feet across. And it was filled with the resin of God knows how many trees that they had burned. So at the top of the pyramid, they had burned this huge incense. And there I had been standing in it.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. So I was told that by my friend Francis Rico, who's a Toltec shaman and who has heard that from the lips of the guy who uncovered it.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's no BS. That really happened.
Right.
That's a sciencey thing.
But this wasn't the only experience that you had as an adolescent. This was just one of the first. You then were in a car accident. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, you know, we had that Volkswagen bus, and it was a 59. You know, it was a champion. Probably, I think my dad told me it was one of the first ones in California. So we got this Volkswagen bus, and so we had driven it all over Mexico, and then we had taken it up on a freighter from Veracruz to New York, where my dad was working for the fair, the World's Fair in 1964. He got a job working there. So we had the Volkswagen bus in New York, where we were living on Long Island in a little town called Laddingtown outside of Locust Valley. And so we were on our way to the Episcopal Church, St. John's of Laddingtown, for, I guess it was Good Friday services. And I had scored the seat in the back, the middle seat, which was prime territory, because if you weren't in the middle seat, you had to sit in the back seat. And there was another brother in the front seat. So I had the middle seat, and I actually think this was after church. So I was seated with my legs up, with my back to the door. And the door hadn't been latched. Those old Volkswagens, they had these latches that kind of went in like this. So the door had been shut, but it hadn't made it into the holes, the latches. Uh-huh. And so I leaned against the door and it opened. You know, we had driven thousands of miles in this car with no incident. And then my mom went around a corner and I went out the door. And as I went out the door, it was an interesting experience because I flipped. And as my head went down and my feet went up, I looked up. And the last thing I saw before I hit the ground was a huge crow on top of a light pole, like just a wooden pole. Mm-hmm. And I looked up, and the crow looked down at me, and it was surrounded by this sort of pale lavender light, and it looked down at me, and it projected the thought, it'll be okay. So I heard this voice, this sort of masculine voice saying, it'll be okay. You know? And then, bam, I hit the ground. And I hit my head really badly, knocked me unconscious. I scraped up the whole side of my body, banged up my hip, my leg, and was bleeding all over. And my mom thought she had run over me in the car and was just like totally freaked out. And so my little brothers, I was 14, Rob was 12, Dave was 10. My little brothers got out and picked me up and put me in the car while I was still kind of unconscious. And then I opened my eyes with the one brother, my brother David, looking down at me going, you'll be okay, like that. You'll be okay, Desi. And I opened my eyes and I looked at him, and I couldn't see him. All I could see was all this energy, all this light. and everything was really, really bright and kind of like day glow colors. So I always joke that, Peter Max had nothing on me. I was seeing day glow before he ever invented it. but anyway, so I looked at him, and my brother David was just this mass of energy, and I couldn't make out his face. I couldn't see anything. So I thought, oh wow, I really got hit on the head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I honestly don't remember quite what happened. I know that maybe they took me to the doctor. I don't even remember. Mm-hmm. And I was taken back to my house and told I had a bad concussion. And I laid on my parents' bed and on the couch, and nothing was ever the same again. I, from that point on, saw these incredible lights and colors around people. And then it was a process of about 40 years of learning how to work with that.
Wow. So you still see that way?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Wow. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with my brain. I'm fine. So, or my eyes. Uh-huh. So people are like, oh, you must have had damage to actually no. Because I got myself thoroughly looked at, because I thought, geez, this has got to be something.
Something got knocked loose or something, but apparently not. So then now, after all these many years and after the career you've had and continue to have, which we'll talk about, but looking back, how do you have an explanation as to why these things happen to you? I mean, I know everything happens for a reason, and even though we're all afraid of these kinds of things happening, they're not always bad, as you've shown. Why do you suppose this happened?
Well, I think that's actually a very deep question, because I believe that I'm here for this work to come forth. Mm-hmm. That I have been waiting probably lifetimes to bring this work forth. Mm-hmm. And that I probably have tried earlier and it didn't happen. It wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. So this work is coming into the world now because the humanity is at a crossroads. Mm-hmm. I mean, just look around and see what's going on our planet and our government and in our world. And you can see that we're at a crossroads. And that crossroads has been really something that's been happening not just for a few years, but for many years. Mm-hmm. So our crossroads really started probably around World War I, and we're still in the crossroads. We're still at the crossroads. And things are getting more intense in some ways. People are becoming more awakened. There are probably more alive and awakened people now than there ever have been in the history of humanity. And what I mean by awakened is I mean people who are aware that they're more than a physical body, mm-hmm. that they have access to parts of themselves that they actually didn't think to have access to mm-hmm. years and years and years ago. So I believe that we are at a great awakening time, and that, you and I are doing the work that we're doing in the world for a really good reason, to share with people potential, possibility, ideas, concepts, beliefs, and things that have occurred in different people's lives that have inspired them or brought them to a greater state of awakened awareness. Mm-hmm. So what I see and how I see has a lot to do with spiritual maturity and being able to actually handle it. And it took me a long, long time to learn how. It took me years it took me about 4 years after the accident to actually be able to see again, to really see. And I learned how to dissect energy. I learned how to see with ajna, which is the inner sight. So I would actually walk through a room with my eyes closed and see better than I did with my eyes open.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It was easier for me to go to the bathroom in my sleep, with my eyes continued to be closed, than it was for me to open them and have to deal with all the sort of things that were in the way going to the bathroom, the light from the window throwing all kinds of energy at me, and me having to deal with things in the house that were there that I had to see through and walk through. So I would sometimes stop at the top of the stairs and think, are there stairs there still? Because I would look down and everything would be just energy. It would just be like little dots of light. It would look like, not Monet, who's the painter? Seurat? Seurat. Pointillist. Pointillist.
Right.
You know, and so like all these little dots. And pixelation, you know, in a camera today, the TV, when it goes all out of whack, that's how it looked to me all the time.
Wow. So how did you then get your vision back to at least normal enough to where you can function in the world without your eyes closed?
Well, what I did was I learned how to map what I saw.
Okay.
And then I learned how to discard what I didn't need. So I learned a process of elimination, sort of. Mm-hmm. So I would look at someone's energy, and I would think, I want to see their face. So I would then close my eyes and I would see their face in my mind. And I would get a pretty good approximation of what their face looked like in my mind. And then I would open my eyes and their face would pop through the energy and I would see it.
Wow.
So I learned how to, that's what I call dissection. So, and then I started doing that with parts of what I came to realize later, many years later, was an anatomy. And I would say, I want to see that, I want to see what that red blob is over there on the side. And I would close my eyes and I would look at the red blob and then I would open them and the red blob would pop forward and I would see that, oh, wait, that's not a blob, that's a wheel. And look at that, it continues all the way across and it's resting on the sort of near the shoulders. And I see, oh, it's turning. That's why it looks like a blob. And so then I would close my eyes again and I would look in the mind's eye at that wheel. Mm-hmm. And then I would open them again and the blob would be less of a blob, more of a wheel, pop forward, and I would begin to be able to draw it. So I started drawing what I could see, not in the initial stages, but what I could see after I had dissected a little bit. And so I developed the anatomy over time. Mm-hmm. It started to be clear to me that it was a consistent thing around all people. And so as I began to do this, you know, it started to make some sense. But the way that I was able to walk through space was to say, anything and everything that is not necessary for me, please get out of my way. Please leave. And so I would just move through space like that. And I would be constantly dismissing. And sometimes I literally was going like this, like, move over. I don't want to look at you. Get out of my way, you know. Oh, wait, that's a living thing. Okay, let me be with that. And so life was surprising and shocking at times. And I actually had a kind of a PTSD, I think, because loud noises and sounds frightened me. And I would look at my hands and my arms, and they would be just massive light. I wouldn't see physical body there. And so I had to concentrate to be able to see my body. I had to concentrate to be able to see other people. And I went from being able to see their faces to being able to see their shoulders and their hair. And then I could see their whole bodies. And so for me, it was an accomplishment to just get through the day.
Right. So you just had to really learn to focus more and more. So now when you're when you're looking at me, what are you seeing?
Well, what I see when I look at you is I've chosen to see your face and your shoulders and your body. So I'm seeing you a little bit, you know, to the upper chest. And then I see that interesting brain behind you that's as the coolest drawing. And so, oh yeah. So when I look at you, I see all this light emanating from your throat and emanating from right between your eyes back. It's as if your pituitary is on fire and you're lit up because I think you have brow sight. I think you have clairvoyant sight. And so there's a certain amount of light that's just emanating from you. So when I look at people, I can see like what their skill set is. I can kind of recognize. So like, for example, you you're verbal, you're able to speak, and you're a truth speaker. So part of your journey in this world is to speak the truth, and it's kind of like no matter what that looks like, Lisa's got to say it. It's coming out of her mouth. Look out.
Sagittarius thing.
It's coming out. And then you have this like active pituitary, which is the center of clairvoyant sight. Mm-hmm. So it's very active in you. And I'm wondering if your clairvoyance is more along the lines of, I guess what I would say is premonitions and kind of sense of like things that might occur or feelings about things that are coming up and arising, but there's a way that you see it in your mind. Am I accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So you see this in people without even trying.
Yeah, no, it's always on.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I see around you is I see different colors, different striped sort of layers of energy. So there's a lovely sort of pale persimmon color right around your body. And then next to that is this really beautiful dark green energy. And these are the layers, which are the organs of the subtle anatomy. And then there's a really beautiful yellow, golden yellow, lemony yellow layer and then just beyond the view of the camera, I can see that there's another color, which is more of a teal or a turquoise color. So I can see the layers, and then I can also see the chakra streams coming in to the brow and the throat. And I can see just the top of your heart chakra there and your crown chakra. And then there's activity I can see that's outside of the picture. So sometimes I see that, like outside of the screen.
Right.
And so there's that kind of thing. So I'm seeing activity in your structure, plus that big shoulder wheel that's an elimination wheel, or the wheels of karma, and it's turning, it's spinning, you're eliminating debris as we speak.
Well, that's fascinating. So how much of this can you actually teach other people to do? Because I know you teach all kinds of classes. What exactly can you teach people? Because we don't want to all fall out of a van.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, so I think the things that I teach people, so I have introductory classes that I teach that are online, I'm teaching one right now called Solutions, Stress, Anxiety, and EMF Toxicity, and I teach energetic solutions for how to deal with those things. Mm-hmm. And I talk to people about what causes anxiety energetically, what causes stress energetically, what electromagnetic disturbances do to your subtle anatomy. So I've had this whole class based on that. And there's no prerequisites. Anybody can come into that kind of a class. Mm-hmm. And then I have classes that are a little more advanced where people actually travel to study with me. One called, interestingly enough, the Edge Practice, 5 Steps to Powerful Energy Boundaries. Mm-hmm. And that is this weekend I'm doing that class, and it's always well attended. And what that class is people learning how to actually place their awareness at the edge of the sacred anatomy and interact from the world from there. Because one of the things I learned as I was going through understanding what I was seeing now and what was happening now was that if I interacted with my electromagnetic field, that it always made me feel sick. I always felt sick.
Interesting.
So my electromagnetic field, which in all of us is right around our physical bodies, people have for centuries used it as a way to do energy work and healing. And if I tried to do that, I would just get sick. I would catch everything. And so I couldn't do that. I had to figure out another way to be in myself without getting sick, because I didn't want to be sick all the time. Mm-hmm. So I learned how to place my awareness and attention at the edge of the sacred anatomy, not the electromagnetic field, how to incorporate what the electromagnetic field's job is, which is, different than what people think it is, actually, and hold that field kind of close, and then place my awareness at the edge. And while my awareness is at the edge, I am able to sit, it's kind of the seat of compassion in the human structure. And it's the place where you're most open to universal energies and universal input, the creative force, all those things. And it's where you have less judgment and less need to put your egoic stamp on something. So I teach people how to do that. And people have told me over the years, they've said things like, this is what happens when I'm in a 6-day meditation retreat on about the 5th day. This is how it feels. And yet there are 5 steps and a way to do it, you know. Then I also teach a class called Energetic Hygiene, which teaches people how to actually, you know, be in the world using this edge practice, which is a practice. I mean, it takes a while to get good at it. Most people can like find a spot and they're kind of like, I'm at the edge. And it's like, not really. 360. You want to be at the whole edge, right? So there's a class called Energetic Hygiene, in which I teach people clearing and how to bring in energies and how to sever entanglements and how to actually seal their electronic equipment.
Okay.
So that it doesn't get them, hurt them.
Right. Right.
So I do that. And then I have another class called Sacred Anatomy Energy Medicine Bag. And that is a wonderful, more in-depth class. It's really geared more towards people who are interested in the healing path. And in that class, we learn tons of things. I teach the electromagnetic field suite, which is a whole way to rebuild the electromagnetic field, to replenish the electromagnetic field, to massage it, to charge it, doing everything from waking the core of this at the center of the structure and having a relationship with it, to clearing all of the 7 systems that I've mapped. So it's an extensive, very deep kind of thing to go through the medicine bag and then follow that with the prac training. And I have a practitioner training with 4 levels. And then I have master classes that I give. I have a class called Entities, Astrals, and Possessions, which is a class that specializes on how to deal with that aspect of a human life. But more and more, I'm developing classes for everybody, and classes where you don't have to have prerequisites, and classes where you don't have to be a healer, and classes where if you're just a curious person who's been studying yoga or has a meditation practice or hasn't even had the courage to do that yet, but sees stuff, you know, right. I'm the person to study with, because not only have I mapped it, but I'm grounded and solid and calm and even, and I have a good time. So my classes are fun, you know. Yeah. I've got one coming up at the new year that's an intention setting, and that's going to be available on my website for just anybody. And then next year I'm launching a 12-month series, so 1 class a month for 12 months, where we're going to explore the divine attributes, things like patience and creativity, spirituality, truth, justice, and all of those different ideas will be explored one at a time, and it'll be a really fun series to be part of.
Yeah, this sounds like there are so many different directions you can go with this work, but I want to come back to what you were talking about with the edge, because that really, I don't know what it was especially that you said, but it really piqued my interest. It was where you put your attention on the edge of your field, and I was almost seeing like an Alex Gray type painting where it's all eyeballs on the edge of your field, where did you develop that as a result of not being able to see? Is that how you learned that, by putting your attention out there? Is that?
Well, let me tell you, you remember I told you I used to be sick all the time? Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the 80s, I got really sick. I got what was probably a reactivation of my hepatitis from when I was a little kid, because I was now in my 30s, so it had been a full 20 years. And I think the hepatitis reactivated my liver, became very, very inflamed. And I ran a fever at one point of 104 for a long time. I was really sick. We couldn't calm my energy down. And of course, I got dropped off health insurance, so we were, trying to mix potions in the kitchen, for me. But what ended up happening was I had a little 6-year-old daughter, and I couldn't cuddle her. I couldn't pick her up because it was so painful. And so one day I was laying in bed sweating, which is what I did every day. And she was playing in her room. And you know how little ones are when they're playing. And she was talking to her toys like, no, you go over there. No, I don't want you to do that. And she was having all this little talk, They're so cute at that, 6 years old. They're so darling. And so I felt her and I thought, I want to just touch her matted little hair. She had like this curly mop, and it was always just matted at the back. And we would have to use a whole bottle of Johnson's baby shampoo to just even get it vaguely clean. It was like, and I was like, I'm going to cut it all off. No, mommy. So of course I never did, it was just matted. She had Rasta, So it really was. So I wanted to just touch her matted little damp head, And there was a part of me that thought, well, I can't touch her with my physical body because it'll hurt me. Mm-hmm. But I can just maybe reach out with my energy structure and touch her. So I kind of went as far as I could to feel the edge of my structure. And I just pushed through the wall. And I remember sticking my hand kind of out and feeling it like at the edge of the structure. And I just kind of picked up the edge and thought, I'm just going to touch her with that like it's my hand. And I just patted her head. I just stroked her head. I was just dying for contact, Mm-hmm. I touched her head. And she went, Mom? I went, yeah, in the other room. Did you touch my head, Mom? I went, kind of. And she came running into the bedroom and she said, Mom, what did you do? And you can't get out of bed. And I said, well, I touched you with the edge of my energy field, I think, with my hand. And she said, you're totally magic. And I said, well, I don't know. And she said, if I go in the backyard, can you do it? And I said, maybe. So she goes tearing through the house, out into the backyard, screams, I'm in the backyard, and I hear this. And so I just sent my energy structure out to the backyard and with my hand, and I just found her head and I touched it. She went, you did it, Mom, you did it. And then she comes running back in. She goes, see if you can do it under Daddy's desk. And she goes under Daddy's desk, and she's under there. And she goes, can you do it now? And I'm reaching, and I touch her. Because I can feel it. And then she goes, I gotta pee. And then she runs in the bathroom. She goes, can you touch me in the bathroom? And so I do my hand and I touch her in the toilet, and she goes, I can feel it. And she comes in, she goes, this is boring. And she goes back to doing her dolls, And I was like, what did I do? What did I do? So that kept me busy for a while, trying to unpack what I had done. And I kept experimenting and, I'd put my hand through the wall and go out into the freeway, feel the cars going by. And I could do that, And so there was this awakening that I had, this awareness that happened just out of desperation.
Wow.
I know, crazy, right?
Now, is your daughter particularly sensitive?
She's extraordinarily sensitive, but she's not really pursued this. It's your thing, Mom. I don't want to. And I'm like, please, help me. Uh-huh. So now she's helping me a little bit. And she's taken classes with me. But to answer your question, yes, she's very sensitive.
Okay, so she was perfect companion to learn how to do this with, because otherwise you would not know that you could do this, right?
Right. Who knows what I would have figured out. Now, I used to play music. Bob and I had a band together and we would play music, and I played lots and lots of parties. And so I would experiment with bringing in energy while I was singing to change the room so that we'd have a happier crowd, you know? And so I would do that. So I was already kind of messing around with stuff, but I hadn't ever touched anyone with my energy structure. I hadn't actually done that until then. So that was about, I think that was about 86, 85, 86 that I did that.
Wow.
And then it really wasn't until the late 90s that I began to teach, because I'm a believer that the teacher needs to be whole. So I made myself well, and then I made myself even more well. And by the time and then I really retired from my music career. And then I was kind of like empty, kind of open. And I had a deep awakening at that time that just was like all about the nothingness and the emptiness and the void and kind of floating in space. And as I was floating in space, I had an awareness that came to me of, you know, you're now ready. And so I began teaching.
Wow.
And within a short period of time, I had a bunch of students and I was just going.
Well,
And I put it together, and I wrote the book that I wrote, and I've written all these booklets. Look at this. I've written, this is just what I could grab. So I've written all these books. These are all classes that I teach.
Wow.
I have so many classes that I teach. It's like so exciting. I feel like a one-woman college.
Well, I do want to talk about your sacred anatomy, because we were running out of time. I could talk to you for days. You know that.
I know. We should just have an installment series.
We should. Let's do that. But in the meantime, let's talk about, once again, the book, Your Sacred Anatomy. It's an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
How did you, in just a few minutes, you know, how do you capsulize your entire life's work into this much time? But how did you come across the idea of your sacred anatomy, actually mapping it out? I mean, I know you sort of touched on this, but let's dive in.
Okay. Well, here's when it happened. I was pregnant with my daughter in 1978 and 79. And during that period, I had an experience of walking out my door and looking at people on the street, and I could see right through their physical bodies. So I could see sort of like living x-rays, or really more like living MRIs. So I could see hearts beating and livers pulsing, and, you know, I could see right into people's bodies. And that went on for a little while. And what ended up happening when I did that was I could see like the entire anatomy laid out before me, like as if someone's rib cage were just opened up. And I could see the lungs and the heart and the liver, the kidneys at the back. I mean, I could like see the stomach. So I could see everything. And I could see the omentum of the intestines and the peritoneal sac. So I saw these things, and when I looked, I realized that what I was seeing outside of people around them was the same as what I was seeing inside. And I realized what I was looking at was anatomy. Before then, I had called it the lights. I saw the lights. I saw lights around you. I see lights coming out of you. But until that moment, I didn't think of it as anatomy. So that idea was born pretty young. I was pretty young. I was in my 20s. And I saw this. I thought, oh, it's anatomy that I'm seeing. But then I didn't really do anything with it except for draw my little drawings and write my little things. Like, I think this is the template, this template thing. I remember I called the template, which is the nervous system of the sacred anatomy, I called it the placeholder for a while. You know, it's like I had all these names that I gave things. And it took a long time for me to talk to the parts and get them to come forward and teach me. And then it just seemed like I kind of just knew a lot of stuff. Like I just knew it. And so then it became clear to me that there had been some past life memories and things opened over time. And I began to realize that I knew a lot more than I thought I did. And ironically, that had been, you know, in your high school yearbook, you always write like your pipe dream or whatever. And mine was to know what I know inside myself and be able to share it with another person. And here it was. I was knowing what I knew inside of myself, looking at other people, and then sharing with them what I saw. So I did readings for a long time, and then those readings evolved into healings, and then healings evolved into teaching, and teachings now evolved into a global career.
Yeah. In fact, you were a guest on the Ancestral Healing Summit.
I was.
So you even can help with ancestral healing as well, which of course is my personal passion. So yeah, you've got a really full range. You do mediumship. You pretty much you can knock on pretty much any door, can't you?
I can, and it's kind of amazing to have actually developed this to this point. Because it was all, I never studied with anybody. I would take a class with someone, like literally a 4-hour class with a person. I took 2 or 3 of those, in my early years. And I still think very fondly of those people, but I didn't study with anybody, not like people study with me.
Right.
And what I came to realize there was no earthly teacher for me. And so I had to go to the inner. I had to listen to what I knew inside myself. And I also had to talk to spiritual beings and unseen teachers. And I had to pray. I had to pray to God, help me understand this and why I'm doing this. Would help me help others. And so, the greatest joy of my life is that I can help others now.
Yeah, you absolutely can. Yeah, because you and I have worked together. I've had readings with you, and they've been pretty astounding and life changing, and also a lot of fun because you're so much fun to work with. But I got to ask, since you mentioned praying to God, who was the big white man? Was that
the big white guy? Well, I'm pretty sure it was an angel.
Okay.
And I think it might have been Gabriel. I think it's possible it was Gabriel, but it also could have just been an angel, like a guardian angel, who was meeting me there and saying, "Not now."
Right.
No.
You can see the carousel, you can see all that, but come.
But go. Yeah. Right. And there's more that happened to me through my life where I returned to that place. So I was allowed to go back, and I was allowed to go in, actually. So, but that was the closest to teaching that I got. So I was taken by a woman I called the White Lady, who was another big white person. But this was, and I don't mean that as skin color. I mean that as like the whole thing. It's just this glowing golden white. And she would take my hand and take me through, kind of like, "No, get out of our way. We're going in." And she would take me in, and we would sit on a bench at the pond there. There was this beautiful pond with like trees and flowers. I mean, it's just beautiful. And I would go and I would sit there with her, and she would give me teachings, which I never could remember what it was she said.
Right.
I couldn't remember a word. So I would have these experiences all through my childhood, after the death experience in Teo and on through, and then the head injury. After that, I would have these random things where I would either be unconscious, asleep, or daydreaming, and I would have this experience with the White Lady. And she would take me and she would give me these long lectures. And then when I was in my late 40s and I had the awakening, really deep awakening of nothingness, that was when the memories started to come back, and I remembered everything she had taught me. So much of what I'm talking about and doing and working with is what the White Lady taught me. So I didn't have an earthly teacher, but I sure had a teacher, the Great White Lady. So.
Wow. Well, that's just, I could keep this forever, but we are totally out of time.
Oh,
Wow. I want to make sure we mention your website, yoursacredanatomy.com.
that's it.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to take any of the classes that you've mentioned, I recommend them personally. Yoursacredanatomy.com is the place to do it. Wow. Before I cut you loose, Desda, do you have any final words? Is there anything that we have? Well, of course, there's a lot of things we haven't talked about yet.
Yes, I want to say something to your wonderful audience. I want to say you have secrets inside of you. You have magic in you, in every cell of your body, in every single molecule of who and what you are. You have brilliance. You have genius. You have a capacity that you haven't even begun to touch. Take a deep breath and allow just the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you can discover something amazing about yourself in the next day. There you go.
All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Desda. This has been just a delightful conversation as usual. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Lisa, and good luck on your awesome network.